I'm Editor-in-Chief Elizabeth Thompson, for those of you who did not already know that when you saw me earlier this morning. I'd like to welcome you to our Wildfire Science and Management panel. I don't think I need to inform anyone that wildfires have been a real problem over the past few years, including in Nevada. I'm delighted to be joined remotely today by two experts on this topic. Christina Restaino is an assistant professor. She'll be coming up on screen, I hope, soon, and natural resources specialist up at UNR. And Dr. Tim Brown there, who you see with that lovely art in the background, which he informed me yesterday he switches out seasonally, is a research professor in climatology for our very own Desert Research Institute. And he's also the director at the Western Regional Climate Center. It looks like we're having trouble getting Christina on screen, so I think, Dr. Brown, I'll just start with you then, if you don't mind, sir. One thing I wanted to talk about, because it's been much in the news the last few big wildfires in California, is that electrical grid failures have been pinpointed, number one, as sources of some of the most damaging wildfires we've seen in recent years, one of which spread into Nevada a couple summers ago. I wanted to ask you, are grid failures of one type or another the most common man-made cause of wildfires? And if not, what is?
Yeah, good morning, everyone, and thanks for having me on the panel today. No, they're not the most common. In fact, the way that human-caused fires, right, there's two types. There's natural-caused fires. Lightning is the main one of those, and then there's human factors. There's a number of what's considered to be general causes of that, but there's nearly 60 specific causes that can be noted in a fire report. So electrical grids is actually a very small percentage. Probably the biggest factors are debris burning, campfires, cigarettes, arson. There's a whole range of these. I mean, a number of big fires have even been caused they're human caused, but they're quite by accident. So like a chain coming loose along an interstate, for example, or a roadway that creates a spark and that starts a fire. But unfortunately, a lot of the electrical fires that we've had, and not just in California, but globally as well, Australia has had to deal with this electrical fire problem as well, that they do tend to occur on some of the worst fire danger days. So windy conditions, and then it's also been associated either drought or dry conditions with that, warm conditions, so to really help set up the fuels as well. And so unfortunately, all of these things combined together, has created some very large and destructive electrical caused fires.
Yeah, thank you. I don't think I realized there were 60 different causes of wildfires to be talked about, so we don't have time certainly to run through the list today, but that's very interesting. Thank you for sharing that. We're all about learning here at the Indy, so that's great. Welcome, Dr. Restaino. Good to see you. From the Nevada, she's joining us from the rurals today, which I'm a farm girl myself, so I'm delighted that she's doing so and that she was able to join us here today. This question is for both of you, and I think I'll have Professor Restaino go first. In terms of resources and money and planning, is it better, in your opinion, and what does research show, to fund and approach wildfire protection and management from a local level, a state level, a regional level, or is the answer that like all three in a perfect world should really be, spreading the wealth in terms of spending and resources? How are we thinking about this these days?
Yeah, absolutely. So, of course, the answer is that you need all three of those, kind of that multi-pronged approach to be effective at preparing for wildfire. But I think that, if you want me to choose one, obviously 87% of the land in our state is managed by the government. So the Bureau of Land Management, the Department of Defense, and the Forest Service. So obviously there's a lot of public lands in this state that need to be managed. However, wildfires become quote unquote catastrophic and destructive when they come into communities in what we call the wildland urban interface. And so I work in the space of really trying to prepare communities and working with local jurisdictions to really try to kind of bring that wildfire preparedness and that agency within communities to become prepared. Now, comparatively, our state has significantly less resources going to the state level and to the local level, and opportunities for the public to apply for grants to create communities that are more adapted to fire, to do defensible space, home hardening, which is where you actually retrofit your home to be more prepared to withstand embers and a fire if it's approaching your community. So in our Nevada context in particular, I feel like the federal agencies are actually doing a very good job of acquiring funds to help support their efforts in both on the Sierra front and in Elko. In those areas, they have been named priority landscapes. So the Forest Service has gotten a lot of money to help with fuels reduction and all of that work on their lands. We need an emphasis in this state on more funds to our state agencies and to our local communities and avenues for our communities to apply for grants to get work done in their communities. Because really, in order for us to be fire adapted as a whole, we really have to have down to individual homes, individual landscapes around homes. Those have to be hardened and prepared for fire. So we in this state need to put an emphasis on that local level.
Okay, thank you. I learned a lot there as well. Dr. Brown, what do you want to add to that, if anything?
I certainly agree with that. And I think if it's working well, it's actually going in both directions. Right. So what folks are seeing on the ground, I mean, that should filter up to higher levels that can become not just local policy, but maybe state policy, regional policies, national policies as well. And then at the same time, there are, at our higher leadership levels, there is expertise there that where ideas can be formed and also then come back and be applied on the ground, or hopefully, right, these leadership levels are also providing the resources to do whatever the accomplishment is desired to take place on that ground. And I think one good example of this, and maybe Christina can elaborate on it a bit more as well, is what's called the National Cohesive Strategy effort, which has been going on now for quite a few years. But it is all about creating more resilient communities, treating the landscapes, making them healthier landscapes, improving firefighter safety, those sorts of things. So there's lots of pieces to that as well that has to come together into this holistic picture of fire.
Yeah,
absolutely. And I would just briefly add that within that cohesive strategy, right, all of the agencies, local, state, and at the federal level, we're all working under that cohesive strategy and that framework. And I will just say that in this state, our partners at the federal level do as good of a job as they can trickling some of that money down to us at the state and the local level. So I don't want to dismiss that, but I do still think we need our state individuals that can bring money to the state and the local level to support that work more on that level too.
Okay, great. Well, I'm glad you interjected that because that's a perfect segue to my next question. In the 2019 legislative session here in Nevada, there was a bill passed requiring utility companies in particular to submit natural disaster plans, including plans for for dealing with wildfires to the Utility Oversight Commission every 3 years. So that's on the books already. You've mentioned, Professor Restaino, that obviously the state, another thing that could potentially and maybe does need to happen at the legislature is more funding at a state level. But I want to ask you both, and I want to start with Dr. Brown. Other than the state legislature putting more money towards all of the things that Professor Restaino just got done saying, what else can the state do in terms of lawmaking, in your opinion, if anything, to move things along and to work in concert with this national cohesive strategy that you're mentioning, as well as working with our neighbor states when we're finding ourselves, as we did with California recently, working across state lines?
Yeah, I think that's a fascinating question, actually, and I'm not sure I've got the full background to talk about some of this, particularly in terms of what does a law actually do, in fire? If we think of the simplest things that happen, like on an extreme potential for an extreme fire date, right? You can have burn bans, and that kind of information is very effective, right? When you do that, there's very good efforts regarding fire prevention. But in terms of creating these overarching laws, I can see some value in them, but I'm also wondering what's the relationship between those laws and the actual incentives, right, on the ground to do something. For example, communities, you could mitigate against fire things by building codes or ordinances, housing construction, building construction, those types of things. But that can also be some expense to that, some cost to that, particularly if that's put right on, say, the owner of that home or the business to manage. So I guess that's my ultimate wondering here is, I think laws can have a place and they probably can do some things, but we still have to get to this incentive part, because we can do a lot of science and technology, and and that's all good. But so much of the fire is about the political and societal will to actually then take action on these things.
That was well said.
So
I don't know
I
if...
would approach it.
Oh, yeah, go ahead,
Sorry.
Professor. Yeah.
I would just say, so to me, there's a few categories that I could see some policies changing that could kind of help us in this effort. One certainly is building codes and ordinances on new construction in particular. It's always going to be hard to go back to old construction, but we do trainings for folks on defensible space that do landscape planning for new construction. There are requirements within building code and ordinance that requires X amount of trees be planted around new construction that are completely they're going against what we would say you should do to make a building or a community safe for fire. So there needs to be some discussions at local levels in each county, like what are the policies around new buildings and how can we make those be good for both heat island effects that we want to maintain, or to not have be growing, and for fire safety. So that is an area. Also having rebates or some sort of incentivizing program for people that live in old construction. What can they do? Like when you get some sort of rebate for, cash for clunkers was a program, right? Whereas you could turn in an old vehicle and get a percentage towards something. Or if you want to get a new water heater, sometimes they have, okay, well, if you upgrade to one that's more, right? So we need to be thinking about things like this for fire, for your home and the landscape, et cetera. So there's that arena. There's also this entire area of air quality and prescribed burning and burning piles, removing vegetation, is a very critical way that we can reduce our wildfire risk in different ecosystems throughout the state. Now, this doesn't work in every ecosystem type that we have in the state, but in areas that are that have more trees, they need fuels reduction to happen. Air quality is something that gets in the way of doing prescribed burns. Yet when there's a giant wildfire and we have an air quality emergency, then all the air quality requirements go out the window. Okay, so the public lands and the state lands should be legally required. They have to be required to do the fuels and do the prescribed burning and get exceptions to do the burning. Otherwise, we're all going to be huffing horrible toxic smoke when wildfires are burning and buildings and disgusting things are burning that are toxic for us far more than the shrubs and the trees that do have to be burned. And then there's also just at the, not at the state level, but at the federal level, there's a lot of rules and regulations around treating hazardous fuels. And so just streamlining that process as much as we can while still maintaining habitat for sensitive, important species that we have in this state is important, but we need to figure out how to make it be that it doesn't take years to get a project on the ground. And in the meantime, everything's burning down in wildfires. And so it's this balance of really, sometimes I think we need to scrap the whole process and make a new one because what's happening right now isn't working. So what can we do to get projects on the ground in an efficient way to make it so that we can live within our ecosystems in a way that's safe?
Thank you. That was great information, and I just thought of about 5 questions I want to ask as a follow-up. I also want to say out loud right now that we are going to have some time at the end of this panel for some audience questions, and if you're watching virtually and you have a question, go ahead and drop it in the chat, please. I don't know how many I can get to depending on the length of the answers, but I'll try to get to at least a couple here before we wrap the end of the panel. Really interesting what you said there, Professor. In particular, I think what I'm curious about most is there's been this public debate really going on most of my life. I actually remember in Michigan, where I grew up, some of this debate that I'm about to allude to, where there's an argument, I guess, that trying to thin out forest land, in other words, when forest land becomes very dense over time, as it tends to, especially if there's not a drought for some period of time, and then a drought follows, you have a dense forest with lots of brush, and we're all aware that when a spark happens in a situation like that, you can soon have a major wildfire on your hand. I've also read this counter argument that we shouldn't be trying to thin out forests. We should just let things take their natural course as they have for millions of years on the planet, and that this is a waste of time to try to do this, and that there's no way that we can do it because it's too big of a problem. There are too many forests that are dense across the globe. It costs too much money, so on and so forth. Professor, what does the research show? Where is the thinking now in the academic and research world on this topic? And then I'd like to hear from Dr. Brown on this as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. And I've been very involved in that research myself. Overwhelmingly, the science shows us that historically, our forest in the drier part of the West historically had significant amounts of fire in the past. So we were having lots of low intensity wildfires. It would happen through lightning or through human ignition. So humans would light fires for hunting or to make baskets, a lot of different ways that humans used fire, but lightning caused a lot of fire. Now, when nature was allowed to take its course, those fires would burn through and thin out the forest and kill individual trees, kill the small new trees, and it would just be a more open system that was more resilient to fire, right? So when a fire would come, it would not burn everything down in the way that we see now. that's what gets me with this argument of, well, we should let nature take its course. Well, we're not doing that because we're suppressing wildfires. When wildfires happen, have gotten really good for a lot of years at suppressing those fires. Now we have such a density of trees in in a lot of our ecosystems in the West that make it such that now it's harder to suppress the wildfires because of that ingrowth. Also, we have this issue overlaid where trees use a lot of water. Trees are like straws in the ecosystem, right? And there's too many straws in the cup, right? So when you have too many straws in the cup, the water is all being used. It's being used by trees and evaporating into the air. And then what you end up with is very dry forests, very dense forests. And then you put humans in the equation. We built houses all in the middle of these dense forests, right? So there's dense forests all over the place with houses all intermixed with them. Humans start fires from having a burn pile in their yard, having a campfire, this and that. So it's a pretty complicated situation and scenario. And to say that, I don't like the argument that we should let nature take its course. We're part of nature. Humans are part of this ecosystem. We're here. We've been managing the ecosystems that we live in since humans have been here. And by taking humans out of the ecosystem, that's created this whole problem to begin with. We need to be working within the ecosystems that we live in and being prepared for the natural disturbances that occur, which are fire. Now, I'll just say ecosystems in our state are very diverse. We've got woodlands and sagebrush ecosystems, the Mojave Desert, and forest ecosystems. Not all of these ecosystems need to be managed and treated in the same way. Prescribed burning and treating fuels in the sagebrush is a very different situation due to cheatgrass and a lot of grass invasion that has really altered what happens in those ecosystems. And I could go into that more if you want me to, but that's a different story than the forest fuels and tree thinning and things like that.
Yeah, thank you. Dr. Brown, what would you like to add?
Yeah, definitely all of that. And then when I think about these dense forests, there's like three major factors that will stress a forest. One is drought, as Christina referred to. Another one is beetle kill. And so when you have a dense forest, that makes it much easier for beetles to propagate through that forest. And I've seen studies that indicate thinning a forest can definitely help mitigate that problem. And then there's air pollution issues as well, general air pollution, potential impacts from ozone and those sorts of constituents. So everything that I've seen as well, and I think the consensus is there that yes, a thinner forest makes it a healthier forest and more resilient to conditions. And the other thing, going back to your cost point, yes, we've got a lot of acres, area that needs to be treated, but that has to continue to be treated. That's not a one-time, and done thing. But we spend billions and billions and billions of dollars a year related to wildfire. There are many hidden costs in there. There's a lot of the direct costs that you hear about from home losses, business losses, and of course, fatalities. But the economic losses, many direct, but there are also many indirect losses as well. And this is economically much bigger than I think what a lot of people realize in terms of those costs. So it seems to me that, and really in terms of suppression, the prescribed burn costs, field treatment costs are a fraction of what suppression costs are. So we're not even close yet. We know that these field treatments can be very beneficial.
Especially if done strategically, like around communities, like around watersheds where municipal water sources are, right? So thinking really strategically about where you utilize that tool in the toolbox, knowing it's one tool in a very diverse toolbox. Community adaptation, managed wildfire, so allowing natural wildfires to do the thinning work for you, right? When it's a safe, okay time to do that. Prescribed fire, fuels reduction, targeted grazing, herbicide spraying, mowing. There's a lot of different tools we have in the toolbox. That's just one.
So you mentioned water there in one of your most recent sentences, and I wanted to ask a question. I've been nearby major wildfires a couple times in my life because I happen to be traveling in both cases. And so you see, as one part of the suppression effort, these helicopters scooping up water in these giant, I don't know what they're called, maybe you can tell me here in a minute, these scoopy things that like pick up the water from a nearby lake, right? And then gets carried, closer to the fire. And I always think to myself, gosh, I don't see how that could really make a difference, but I mean, obviously we have to try, right? And I realize that they're addressing, the edges of the wildfire and doing what they can. But I'm curious about, are we focusing more now when we talk about dealing with wildfires? Are we on getting water to where the wildfire is, or are there chemical agents that are more effective now than water, or are we trying to do both? And is there anything new in the way of suppression technology that you can tell us about? Dr. Brown, I think I'll start with you on that one.
Sure. So when you see all these aircraft operations, and that's a very expensive part of fire suppression. I think for pretty obvious reasons, you're managing this very expensive equipment and maintaining it. These are not going to solely put out a wildfire, and it's going to depend on the situation. There are a lot of times that you lay down these lines ahead of a fire. It may help stop it, but probably the bigger idea behind that is to reduce the fire severity to allow the ground crews to be able to do more of their things. When you see a helicopter dropping a bucket, typically they're aiming at a hotspot or some resource of value, that they want to try and protect. And in terms of the chemical, when you see if you've seen the red dumps from the aircraft, that's basically water with some fertilizer in it and some red coloring just to mark the spot. I know there's companies thinking about ways, maybe other technological things. I'm not so up on those exactly. But yeah, I guess that's my initial take there.
Professor, you have anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, I would just say I agree with all of that the water really, I feel like all of those things are used to really help the ground crews get a better, safer place to do the active work on the ground. But I would definitely say one of the biggest tools that people use on the ground is fire, right? Doing a back burn, pushing a fire up so that when the flank of the main wildfire is approaching somewhere, it reaches black is what we call it, right? So using fire to burn out in front of it, to burn towards the wildfire, I think that's probably one of the primary tools that people use. However, I am not a firefighter. I mean, I've had the firefighter training and all that kind of stuff, but I definitely work as a professor. But I work around that a lot, and I have a lot of friends in that field, and I do feel like fire is our primary tool, both in a fire and before a fire, right? So not, it's important to make sure that we as a society have a relationship with fire that isn't only scary, right? We can use it as a really positive, effective tool to help our ecosystems thrive, to help our communities thrive. And there's a lot of experts that know how to use it right. And so, having the public and our communities and our society support them in the use of fire as a tool is one of the most important things that we can do.
Thanks for that. Dr. Brown, I noticed when I was reading up on you and your research that one of the things you work on is this area called applications development for wildfire management. Tell us what that means, and then tell us what's new, if anything, in this area of research.
Well, so yeah, I think what that means is we work very closely with local, state, federal, even international wildland fire management agencies. And so the applications development is basically building information, data, a tool that can help the managers to inform something in the decision-making process. It could be just providing some basic, say, fire weather forecast information. It could be a smoke forecast. It could be, well, we know that, right, trees, for example, vegetation relies on soil moisture, for uptake, but there's also something called atmospheric evaporative demand. This is the extent that the atmosphere takes water back out of that vegetation through the evapotranspiration, right, of the leaves. And so this can be very impactful on fuel flammability and ignition potential. So it's those sorts of projects that we do to really assist the decision-making process for fire management.
There's been a term being bandied about the last few years in both the drought conversations and wildfire conversations, which is cloud seeding. Would you explain just in simple terms for our audience and listeners, what is cloud seeding? Does it work? Has it worked? How much has it been tried? And what has the data showed so far?
Yeah, it's been cloud seeding or weather modification has been going on actually for a long time. But cloud seeding, this is it's a fairly substantial program at DRI, and the idea is, especially in the winter, at least for what DRI focuses on mostly, is you can get a certain combination of moisture and temperature conditions in clouds. And if you add additional nuclei, because every raindrop is formed around some kind of nuclei, like a dust or a chemical nuclei, some part. So if you increase those nuclei, then you can potentially increase the amount of droplets and hopefully get precipitation out of that. DRI focuses mainly on winter conditions in the Sierra Nevada range, for example, here locally. And the idea is to see if we can increase the snowpack in that area. So it does work up to a point, particularly very localized. But the real challenge is you need a pretty narrow set of atmospheric conditions to make this work. But we do it. It's been going on, and I think that effort will continue and should continue.
Professor, you have
How
anything?
is it actually done, Tim? Or do drones fly up and release nuclei, or is it shot up in a cannon, or?
Yeah, basically, at least where I last was familiar with it, yeah, it was shot up basically like from a cannon.
Interesting.
I'd love to see video of that. Is there on the DRI website, is there video available to watch how the cloud seeding is done? That was a great question, Professor. Thank you.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. That's not my particular program.
Okay, understood. I'll be checking the website later today. Okay,
Yeah.
I'm going to start. I think I'm going to start taking some audience questions. If anyone has any, please put your hand up. I'll repeat it for our virtual experts here, so don't feel that you have to shout. If I don't know if there are any questions in the chat, but if there are, Abby, feel free to anytime in the next few minutes that you want, you feel free to flash it. You're gonna go on the mic. Perfect. Julie's got you. Okay, go ahead. Right here in the front.
Oh, we had.
Oh, great. Yes, sorry, I didn't see you back there. The glare. Go ahead. Yes, please.
My question has to do with a factor that is an indirect cost, which is the rising rate for home insurance for fires and businesses, and especially in that urban wildland areas. And I'm thinking here of what's happened in Santa Rosa, California. I'm thinking here about Mount Charleston and other areas where there is that kind of blending. Mm-hmm. How is that affecting public discourse and what's changing to address that indirect cost?
Professor, you want to field that one?
Sure, yeah, this is something we talk about a lot, and I'm glad that you brought it up because I would have wanted to bring it up at some point. So in California, this is a big issue. It's a larger monetary cost change happening there than in Nevada. Homeowners insurance is not regulated in the same way that other insurances are, like automobile insurance and medical insurance. So I know that there's been a lot of conversations with the California Insurance Commission. I'm not exactly sure what it's called, but kind of California State Insurance Agency and the insurance companies working in California. There was just like an agreement reached apparently. That's essentially you should expect a 30% increase across the board in areas that have had a fire. But what's been happening is that people have actually been dropped of their insurance around a fire. We own a house in Lake Tahoe, and I mean, our insurance is through the roof because we have to use the FAIR plan, which is a California state insurance plan that's offered through the state for people that are dropped and just ineligible to be insured by anybody. Like no insurers will insure our home. So
are you saying, Professor?
Fire,
I'm sorry, Professor. Let me just interject. So the state of California, essentially, you're saying provides the insurance when you've been dropped
it's
by
called
your.
The California.
Yeah, go ahead.
I mean, no, you have to pay them for it, but it's called the FAIR plan.
Okay.
But you have to pay for it, and it's very expensive. But there's something. Right. Nevada hasn't gotten into a situation yet where so many people are being dropped that they need to come up with an equivalent plan. I do know that in Nevada, the Nevada State Commission on Insurance, and I don't think that's actually the right name of it, but it's something like that. I always mix up these things. They are having conversations about providing incentives to homeowners that like a 30% reduction in cost if you do X on your home, a 10% cost. And so I know that a lot of kind of administrative and political officials are working with insurance agencies to try to make it be that if you are doing things like defensible space, home hardening, or if your community becomes a fire-wise community, which is a certain type of recognition you can get, then you can get a discount on your insurance. That work is happening. Nothing is concrete, but I will tell you that state fire marshals, individual people are working on this because it's brutal. I have been at both of my homes. I own 2 homes, and they're both heavily impacted by increasing costs of insurance. And it's a disaster. So it's really difficult with rising inflation costs, like the whole panel just before now talking about like, okay, the cost of living is like kind of going up, the adjustments that we get, obviously in Nevada, if you work for the state, we all just got a historic 12% increase. Our wages are still way lower than they need to be to catch up with things like normal inflation, not to mention extreme inflation, not to mention increasing fire insurance. So this is a big issue. People are working on it. I don't think any bulletproof solution has been come up with yet, but we're certainly advocating for it.
I hope some of our lawmakers are listening today or will be watching
I hope
next
so
week
too.
when we put this conversation online. Okay, we had a question here in the front row, I think, as well. Oh,
Hello? Oh, sorry.
there you
Tim and Christina, it's been great to hear the variety of potential solutions that are available to this issue and the importance of coalition building. Nevada obviously being a large and heterogeneous state, what priorities do you think sit best at the state level to be addressed versus what priorities and measures sit best at the local level to be addressed?
Who wants
Do you
to?
want to go, Tim?
Yeah, you want to, or Tim, you can pass if you like.
No, I think it's a fantastic question.
Yes, I agree. I don't know. I might have to think about it a little bit because, as Christina mentioned earlier, we have a lot of diversity in the state. So, what is it that we are attempting to treat? Right, the forested part of the land, the brush part of the land. We've got this invasive species of cheatgrass. And by the way, after a fire disturbance, one of the first things that loves to come back in might be a grass or shrub or some invasive species. So you're not only you're trying to manage for the fire, but there's this whole area of what happens after a fire. Rehabilitation of a fire area, restoration of an ecosystem or a wetland, or whatever. So there's lots going on there.
Professor?
Yeah, I mean, I would comment just on this whole concept of coalition building because that's what I do in my job. I'm a professor in extension. So for those of you that don't know what that is, land grant universities in the US, every state has one. We have professors that their job is to extend science and technology and research that's happening at the university out into the public, out into the world. So I don't teach classes at the university. I hold community workshops. I bring people together. I do things like this. I do research. I write papers. So I do a lot of this kind of community engagement around wildfire. So I'm a part of this big interagency group called Fire Adapted Nevada, which, putting a plug in, we are having a summit on the UNR campus end of February. You can look at our website, livingwithfire.com, to find the information about the summit. It's free, open to the public, open to folks, bringing people together from the local level to really work on this issue of fire adapted communities. Now, this is a great example where we have federal and state agencies and local agencies working together on this initiative. And then we are essentially trying to build community networks of individuals throughout the state at the local level that are bringing together their neighbors and their communities to implement these goals of home hardening and defensible space and other fire adapted community goals in order to be prepared for wildfire. So I think organization at the local level is the most important thing, and these are the goals that we need to be focusing on in this state. Our federal partners are working under an initiative called Shared Stewardship, which is where they are working together to do fuels treatment work, different ecological projects of all kinds, water, habitat, etc., across jurisdictions. So that's why it's called shared stewardship, sharing resources, sharing their funding, etc. All of our agencies are working on shared stewardship as well. So I actually think that at the federal level and at the state level, I think we really have our act together in a lot of ways. I think that partners are working together very well and efficiently. I think where the bottlenecks happen is actually implementation. So we might have all these plans to get things done and then might not have enough contractors to actually do the work, right? And so the bottlenecks, I think that we're all really good at planning. We're really good at collaboration. I think that there's a philosophy and an ethos around that in the wildfire world. So people do work together really well. I think we need more organization with local communities, people in the public that want to step up to be leaders in their community. That's what we need right now.
I'll take this opportunity since you mentioned the upcoming event in February. Where is that going to be exactly, Professor?
That's going to be at the UNR campus
Okay.
in the Joe Crowley Student Union building. There's a bunch of information online on our website for the program that I direct. It's on livingwithfire.com. You can search on there, but the summit will be at the UNR campus, free parking, free food. We just really want to bring people together to really talk about this fire issue. Evening social and reception, 2 days, but it really is a summit very focused on these exact issues.
Sounds fun. Sounds like something a reporter in my newsroom might be attending. I want to mention
We'd love that
there will be another opportunity for Nevadans to hear more and engage in conversation about wildfire management and science in the fall, because Dr. Brown's organization, Desert Research Institute, right now is planning its very first conference next fall, I believe. I don't think we have a month yet, or if we do, it hasn't been shared with me, but there will be conversations at that DRI conference about local, state, regional, national, and global wildfire science and management. And I assume, Dr. Brown, that you'll be participating in that. Is there anything else you want people to know about it?
Thank you for mentioning that. I don't think I have anything else to add at this point in time.
Obviously an important topic, since we have our major land-grant university and our major research institute next year holding events that are focused on this issue, which is one of the reasons that I really wanted to talk about this today. We have time possibly for one more question. If there is one, please raise your hand.
Hi, I just had more of a comment. You brought up cloud seeding, and on the DRI YouTube channel, there is a fascinating documentary on it. It's a very short documentary, but shows them out in the field, exactly how it's done, and you can see it shooting into the air.
Great. I will, for those of you who read the Daily Indy, which is our daily flagship newsletter, I will include a link to that next week to make it easy for you to find. So thank you for making that known. We're almost out of time. Are there? I can wrap now, or are there any questions from anyone? Yes.
I have one. There's one question. I was saying I just have one thing I would like to add before we close.
Sure. Why don't you go ahead with your question real quick? We'll see if maybe there's a short answer, and then we'll let the professor wrap us.
Sure. The Wall Street Journal reported last week Pacific Gas and Electric has a $6 billion plan to bury 10,000 miles of power lines. But the regulators are balking because it's going to mean a surcharge on people's monthly utility bills. Isn't burying power lines one of the best ways to mitigate fire risk?
Let's have a short answer from one of you.
I would love for the power lines to be buried. I think it would be great. I mean, obviously there has to be the balances between costs and everything, but where I live, our power lines are buried already, and it's fantastic. We don't get our power shut off very much because of it.
Okay.
Do you want to add anything, Tim?
No, I agree. Yeah, I think it would be great.
Okay. All right, Professor.
It really has to happen.
Professor, you wanted to add one more thing, and you have about 1 minute to do so.
Yes, I did. I just wanted to put kind of a call to action out there for folks. We had a very big wet winter last year in the northern part of the state. In the Great Basin, we had many years of drought leading up to that. So now we have experienced a big ingrowth of what we call the fine fuels, the grasses and the shrubs. Historical data shows us that the year following, so not this summer, but the year following a big giant winter like that, we see a spike in wildfires in the Great Basin. So if you live in the Great Basin region, this is your time, this fall, winter, and spring, to really prepare your home, defensible space, take some action, because we are expecting a bigger year next year for fire.
Okay, that's a great, positive, proactive note to end on. Dr. Brown, Professor Restaino, I want to thank you so much for giving up part of your Friday to join us for this conversation. I certainly learned a lot from it, and thank you both so much.